right. Thank you for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. There are 4 different items I was going to try and cover this morning. I know time can always be tight during this format, but should be able to get through all of these. So just kind of a revisitation of some water hemp, some group 15, mainly looking at some injury potential on dry bean, update on our land rolling trial, and then some new desiccation information I haven't really shared yet. So first, just focusing on water hemp or really any pigweed. Figured with just with the prices and everything this year is probably a good time to revisit all of our different options that we have from a pre-plant incorporated and pre-emergence standpoint for control. And again, this data set is focused on water hemp, but would apply to basically any pigweed. And so this was a trial a couple of years ago funded by North Harvest that we decided to look at basically everything we had labeled that would be effective in dry bean on pigweed control. And for the most part, these are at the higher end of the labeled rates until we get into some tank mixtures. But we basically looked at Eptam, our different yellow herbicides, Sonland, Treflan, and Prowl, some combinations of Eptam and Sonland, Treflan, and then the different ways we can use sulfentrazone or Spartan, whether it's in Spartan Charge, Spartan Elite, or Broad Axe is the other name that you can find that marketed as. And then a combination to get that sulfentrazone piece with a group 3 herbicide. So again, those are our incorporation treatments. From a residual standpoint, so after planting pre-emergence, we cannot use those group 3 herbicides. And so we really focus on the group 15 products in that category. So dual magnum, outlook, and then again looking at our different ways to accommodate sulfentrazone into that mixture. And so basically that ends up being quite a large data set that we're working with. And so what I'm showing here is the weed control on water hemp 4 weeks after planting. This gold bar in the middle part of the screen separates the pre-plant incorporated treatments on the left from the pre-emergence treatments on the right. And so I should go back up and mention that this whole trial area was incorporated, so essentially the pre-plant incorporated treatments were applied and worked in, but at the same time, the area that the residual herbicides on was also worked in. So all cultivated the same way. And our incorporation depth was 4 inches for the mechanical equipment, giving us about a 2-inch depth for the herbicide. Generally, you divide that incorporation depth by 2 to find where your placement of the herbicide is. Now, a couple of years of this trial, basically every treatment provided about 90% control or greater at 4 weeks after planting. So that was basically a good thing because we're hoping to get 3 to 4 weeks after planting, and whatever few escapes we have there, we would control with a post-emergence application. But we did want to really test this residual chemistry, and so these trials we took to 8 weeks after planting. And that's where we did start to see some of these treatments separate out here. So again, same setup as the last slide. But now some generalizations is that we did actually compare these treatments. And so the pre-plant incorporated treatments did perform better over the pre-emergence treatments for what we can use for water hemp on dry bean. As far as which were the best treatments, basically Eptam and the yellow herbicides ended up working quite well for us. And then some of our tank mixtures like Eptam, Sonland, Eptam, Treflan. And then we did have this Spartan Elite or Broad Axe. So again, that sulfentrazone plus metolachlor looked very good from us from a incorporation standpoint. Comparing the pre-emergence treatments, all gave us going this far out, less than 80% control. So they certainly broke between that 4 and 8 week time frame. But again, where we had the Spartan Elite treatment or sulfentrazone plus a group 15, basically they were all about that 70 to 80% control range. The worst treatment ended up being the Spartan Charge, which is really just relying on sulfentrazone for that residual control. So the other piece of information, probably haven't shared as much as those past couple slides, is we did look at this from a comprehensive standpoint, trying a season-long water hemp control in dry bean. And so again, trial conducted over a couple of years. Basically what we did is we knew that this Eptam Sonland incorporation was working pretty well for us. That was our base residual herbicide treatment. And then we came back at either first trifoliate or third trifoliate dry bean and applied these different mixtures on the screen. So Varisto by itself, in this case, Varisto would not have much control on Waterhemp, since Waterhemp is resistant to Group 2 herbicides, but very effective on redroot pigweed and many other broadleaf weeds, so a base part of a lot of people's programs. Then we looked at Outlook and Dual Magnum, the Group 15 herbicides that we can apply with residual, Reflex, that would help us pick up foliar activity on Waterhemp, and then combinations thereout of all those products put together. What this looked like combined over 2 years. So now, just to make sure everyone is awake and paying attention, I have turned the graph onto its side. So 100% control would be on the far right part of the screen. The gold bar in the middle part of the screen separates the first trifoliate treatments on the top from the third trifoliate treatments on the bottom. Now, the main thing here is that these programs, by and large, really did work for us from a season-long standpoint. So that Eptam Sonland gave us a pretty good base, and then we did eventually reach canopy closure as well. But essentially where we did get up to 100% control is where we did have Reflex in the tank. That did help us clean up those group or the Waterhemp there. And where we had the residual herbicide, we tended to get a little bit of a bump as well. But by and large, taking this type of approach, we were able to go season-long Waterhemp control pretty effectively. So just kind of wanted to revisit that, since Waterhemp continues to spread and overlapping onto some of our dry bean acres. Now, the other question that kind of comes up is when we use these Group 15 products in a over-the-top fashion, what kind of injury potential they might bring, because they both are oil-based herbicides, and so that question just pops up from time to time. So just wanted to point out, until about 2 years ago, Outlook was really the only Group 15 herbicide we could use post-emergence in dry bean. The Dual Magnum label was expanded a couple of years ago, so we can use Dual Magnum post-emergence. I don't know if that actually expands to the different generics, but at least the branded name Dual does have that label now. Essentially, we can apply, want to wrap up before flowering, but really that 1 to 3 trifoliate range is where we're trying to get this Group 15 herbicide on. Again, that's mainly to help us with more residual herbicide throughout the season. So certainly would help out with Waterhemp. Could also help out with things like some late emerging foxtail, as those become more difficult to control in crop. So what I briefly wanted to share is we are just taking a closer look at different tank mixtures and how these Group 15 herbicides might cause injury, just because, again, this question pops up again and again. And so a small trial we put out last year, ended up putting this out on navy beans, but really looking at Dual versus Outlook with different tank mix partners. So we wanted to basically add a whole bunch of different things in the tank, a lot of oil-based products, and see how much injury we get, and that actually conveys to yield loss at the end of the year. So basically, we applied all these treatments that I'll be showing on the next screen on third trifoliate navy beans. Just the various rates that we use. So a pint and a third of Dual, 14 fluid ounces of Outlook. Where we had Reflex, we used the 12 fluid ounces, or 3/4 of a pint. And we did have an oil-based insecticide as well, just to really add as much oil as we could kind of imagine to a tank mix, and then use the crop oil concentrate as the adjuvant. So what this then looks like going across the screen, even though this says a check on the far left here, should point out that this also had clethodim and that crop oil. So every treatment also had generic clethodim 2EC in the mixture as well. This slide is just showing injury, and by and large, we did not see a whole lot of injury last year. If we look at Reflex by itself, again, this actually is Reflex with clethodim and a crop oil, about 5% injury a week after application, and then get out to 14 days after application is this 0 that I'm circling. So basically, the beans outgrew that injury by 14 days after application. Where we started using the Group 15s, and then really the Group 15 plus Reflex, and then plus the insecticide, we got to about, we'll say, 10 to 15% injury. 7 days after application. Maybe a little bit less injury with this outlook plus reflex combination compared to the other 3 on the right side of the screen. But then get out another week and they all looked about the same. So pretty rapid regrowth from the beans from these treatments. So again, this is add in the crop oil and clethodim. We're looking at 5 different oil-based products and still not getting all that much severe injury in this case. Did take this trial to yield. Actually had very good yields at this site last year, but basically we did not see any actual yield differences when we compared the treatments. Across all treatments, anywhere from 3,300 to 3,900 pounds per acre. So again, did see a hint of injury, but again, basically no differences comparing the treatments. Did forget to mention also these were maintained weed-free throughout the year. So that was a quick update on Waterhemp and Group 15 products. Still want to move on to this ground rolling trial or land rolling we've been conducting the past couple of years. Just always set this up from the last time we had the driving survey, and that essentially most of our acres will get some sort of emergent or some sort of rolling. About half of them are pre-emergence, 10% pre-plant, and then about 5% do come back once the beans are up and roll. But it's always wanted to look at what influence does this have on our weed populations or weed control. And since most folks are targeting that pre-plant to pre-emergence, knowing that early season competition from weeds can be problematic, that's where we really focused the main portion of this trial. So we had a couple of different sites. Basically, due to time limitations, I won't be sharing the data from Fargo. It's a no-till site. The only weed there was Waterhemp. And 2024, this site spent a lot of time underwater, so didn't get the best data off of this site in 2024. Be sharing quite a bit of data from Amenia, Prosper, that type of area, about 20 miles northwest of campus. That's a general site that we have with a pretty dense weed population, bunch of different weeds, but basically the focus is 2 grasses and then a whole bunch of different broadleaf weeds. And this was also conducted at Carrington. So Greg Enders conducted this trial site there. Green foxtail being the main grass, but then a composite of different broadleaf weeds were present at the Carrington site. So there's 5 main treatments I'm going to focus on for this portion of the talk. On the far left, we have what I'm saying we're calling no roll and no herbicide. So this is where we simply did our conventional tillage, planted our beans, did not apply herbicide. The far right is kind of the complement of that. We also did not apply a residual herbicide, but we did roll after planting. So basically conventionally tilled, planted the beans, and then use a small land roller within those plots. The middle 3, we did have a residual herbicide. We always used Broadax, again, same thing as Spartan Elite, Authority Elite, at 25 fluid ounces, so not quite the highest rate, but a pretty standard rate that we can use. We applied Broadax in treatments where we did not roll, so again, tilled, planted, put down Broadax. We had a treatment where we rolled and then applied Broadax, or one where we applied that Broadax and then rolled afterwards. So seeing if that sequence of rolling and residual herbicide application really impacted anything. What I'll be presenting, so that's going to be the same setup for the next several sets of slides. What I'll be presenting is our density measurement. So rather than weed control from a 0 to 100% standpoint, we went in and counted the different weeds in a plants per square meter, or call it plants per square yard standpoint. These will be separated out in most of these slides by grasses and broadleafs, just comparing that composite. So 2022, that Amenia site, we did see with the grasses an increase when we rolled without having that herbicide applied compared to not rolling. So we essentially doubled our grass pressure and tripled our broadleaf pressure just by rolling that soil. In the presence of a herbicide application, the densities of grasses and broadleafs were about the same. So herbicide basically did its job, reduced our density of our weeds, But whether we rolled or the sequence of rolling and residual application really did not matter, or really did not impact that herbicide efficacy. Just a couple pictures to really show the differences in density. So this is again that 2022 site year. On the left here is where we did not roll. Then on the right side of the screen is the same treatment from that rep where we did in fact roll. Again, no herbicide application. So really you see a lot of the brown soil is now green, a lot more grass and broadleaf pressure compared to the picture on the left. And we did have a situation where the second rep and first rep lined up. So in the front part of the screen is where we did not roll, no herbicide. This back box is where we did roll. So again, just showing all that extra green, particularly in between rows 2 and 3, increasing weed density by that rolling pass. Same site, we went to 2023. In this case, we took our measurements a little bit early. That was a year where May was very hot and dry, so the beans shot out of the ground, and we had to make a post-emergence application. So 20 days after planting, same kind of trend. Still working on data analysis, really combining years, so I just broke this back out, and we're looking at the raw averages. But essentially, again, we about doubled our grass pressure, did increase our broadleaf pressure again as well by rolling compared to the no herbicide check without rolling. And again, pretty similar response to the weeds. Interesting, just a little bit of a tick up of more grass pressure where we didn't roll, but that didn't really show out in the data. So again, just showing in the absence of herbicide that rolling increased our pressure. 2024, very wet for us to begin the year. We didn't get in and plant until about the middle part of June. So we're back out about 4 weeks after planting. So by middle part of July now, grass pressure overall was lower for us, particularly because of that late planting. But we again about doubled our grass pressure and didn't quite double our broadleaf pressure, but increased broadleaf weed pressure where we rolled. Really no differences there where we had that herbicide applied. So pretty similar trend to this site 3 years in a row. Carrington, again, another conventional till site. 2023, there Greg did not really see much of a difference at all, whether rolling or not rolling in green foxtail pressure, or smaller bars, but these green bars, the broadleaf weed control pressure. So not seeing that same increase at Carrington that we were seeing at the Prosper, the Amenia site. And then herbicide basically worked as advertised and reduced the density at Carrington. 2024 was a little bit more variable and pretty water challenged at Carrington in the 2024 season. So only a couple of replications here because the other ones did flood out. But for the most part, basically the exact same number of plants counted where no herbicide was applied. So not really seeing even the indication of an influence of the impact of rolling at that site. And then the herbicide did reduce the density there. So what did we learn over a couple of years of this trial? Particularly that Amenia site, that rolling did increase the weed density. So but I kind of think of this from a comprehensive standpoint, that's more weeds we have to deal with at post-emergence timing if we don't have that residual herbicide down. So it's going to be a greater selection pressure, more weeds to deal with if with a post-only program. However, when we combine rolling with that residual herbicide, there's really no differences in weed density. So the other thing that I think about is this basically means that we're seeing an overall benefit to our reducing our weed seed bank by rolling. So if we look at no herbicide applications and no rolling versus rolling with no herbicide, basically the absence of herbicide, we increase the weed density. But with the herbicide application, weed density was the same. So that means we're having more weeds emerge and be killed off by the herbicide. So kind of a main takeaway, if you are going to roll, make sure you get that residual herbicide down because you can do a pretty good job cleaning up some of those weeds. And then didn't focus on this due to time, but we did also go in with some post-emergence rolling, and those did not impact our post-emergence herbicide programs either. So basically, those are the main takeaways there. If you're going to roll, get that residual down, and it's going to help us with our weed control. So the last, whatever I have left, 5 or 10 minutes, wanted to focus on some new desiccation trials we've been conducting or over the past couple of years. So a couple of years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years now already, Reviton came onto the market. So this is tiafenacil, very similar chemical to Sharpen, which is saflufenacil. But Reviton currently does not have a desiccation label for many of our crops, and that includes dry bean. But had wanted to look at this for a while now because it, again, from a foliar standpoint, these products look pretty similar. And so wanted to see how it may perform in a desiccation setting. So I wanted to compare a few things, comparing Reviton to Sharpen. Because some other consideration points. Reviton does not have much residual in the soil. And so that can come into play when we rotate to certain crops. If we look at like the Sharpen rotation to sugar beet, you really have to watch the months and the rate. If you use Sharpen in a dry bean desiccation, you really have to watch your rate and then count the months before you can plant something like sugar beet. Reviton does not have many of those same residual considerations when going to a sensitive crop next year. And so this is just popping up directly from the label. If I focus on something like sugar beet, 30 to 60 day rotation from Reviton to sugar beet, comparing to Sharpen, now on the left side of the screen, based on your rate, if you're using 1 to 2 ounces, that's 4 to 5 months going to sugar beet. So pointing that out as the example of a crop that can be, we can a very tight time frame if we use these products to desiccate dry bean and then want to plant a crop like that the next year. So another reason we might want to look at this of, could Reviton be as good as Sharpen from a desiccation standpoint, but open up some rotational flexibility for crops the following year. So this is just a chart showing chemistry, but the main thing for me is that tiafenacil, saflufenacil, so that's Reviton and Sharpen, pretty similar chemistry, just the side chain is the main difference, and that, again, really shows off in residual herbicide differences or the amount of residual activity we get, but not as much in foliar activity. So 2 different trials I want to present, and again, we will have a very similar setup for our tables the next couple slides. The first one, I was simply looking at Sharpen at 2 rates, 1 and 2 fluid ounces versus Reviton at 1 and 2 fluid ounces. 3 colored bars, so gold, green, and purple, represent leaf, pod, and stem. 100% would mean that these, in the case of leaves, are brown and completely knocked off. Pods are completely brown. Case of 0 would be green, completely healthy plants, which nothing will be 0 since we're timing this about 80%, 70 to 80% pod turn and leaf turn. So in general, 2022, the only difference that we saw was 1 ounce of Sharpen, took a little bit longer or did not turn the leaves brown as fast as 1 and 2 ounces of Reviton, with that 2 ounces of Sharpen being somewhere in between. Otherwise, these products and rates look the same on pods and stems at 3 days after application. Go out to 10 days after application, which is when we will be targeting to harvest after desiccation treatment, and all products looked the same. So Reviton basically looking the same as Sharpen in this desiccation application. 2023 was a very similar story. So in this case, so 3 days after application, they all look the same. And then did not show 10 days after application, but we were basically a complete desiccation and mature crop. So just looking at those different rates, Reviton certainly looking as good as Sharpen at finishing off the dry bean crop itself. I want to share a little bit more of an expansive trial. So this was looking at Sharpen and Reviton, but we also included defol which is sodium chlorate. So not a herbicide, but something that we can use to desiccate our crops. And then gramoxone, which can be used quite a bit, or paraquat in the desiccation market, and then various tank mixes. So for the most part, 1 ounce Sharpen, 1 ounce Reviton, 1 pint of a 3-pound gramoxone. Default by itself was 4.8 quarts per acre. Then in tank mixtures was half of that, so 2.4 quarts. So ignore typo there. Anytime default is in tank mix, it was a half rate. This leads to a lot of different treatments. And so to kind of make this more simple, basically what I did, the no herbicide check is on the far left. I did break out 2023 and 2024. So from the herbicide or desiccation product standpoint, anytime a product was not among the best, so statistically less than the best treatment, there's a red box around that particular data point. So if I focus on gramoxone in this case, leaf, pod, and stem, it was providing less desiccation than the best treatments, which are basically all the other ones except for the tank mix of gramoxone and default. Go out to 10 days after application in 2023. Again, gramoxone was lagging a little bit behind, still about 95% color turn. And then gramoxone and default was a little lagging behind on the stem. 2024 was an interesting year for this desiccation trial. So basically the pods were about 80% to 85% brown, ready to be harvested. But the rest of the plant, the stems and the leaves were hanging on forever. So we did pull the trigger early compared to what we would want to in a commercial setting. So by 3 days after application, the leaves and stems of the plants were still pretty green in the untreated plots, but about 90% pod turn or pod color, brown color in that check. So again, same setup where the red box is, that was lagging compared to the best treatments. So for instance, Sharpen 79%, Reviton 73%. This default and gramoxone were less efficacious, turning those leaves brown and necrotic. But the main point is then going out to 10 days after application and this challenging situation. Again, Sharpen, Reviton, some different tank mixes like default and Sharpen, default and Reviton, gramoxone and Sharpen, gramoxone and Reviton were the best. And we had some various iterations of the remaining 3 treatments not being quite as good. So kind of to summarize, since that was a lot of data really at once, Reviton, currently not labeled. There is a possibility that we will have that by desiccation season this year. We are working on that. If not, it would probably be for the 2026 season. Expectations for finishing the crop similar to Sharpen. Did not show any weed control data because these were kept weed-free, these trials. What we've seen is the Sharpen rate. If you're just trying to finish off that dry bean crop, rate does not really matter. 1 ounce looks like 2 ounces. Where we see the difference is if we do have some weeds that need controlling, or if we want some residual weed control out of that application as well. That's where that 2 ounce rate we can see a benefit. Gramoxone and paraquat, we're just not seeing that be very efficacious for us for finishing off the crop. Very beneficial when we have weed control needs, but as far as just knocking the leaves off and getting that dry bean crop ready to harvest, definitely slower than our Group 14 herbicides. And then default looked pretty good for us in 23, a little bit more variable in 2024. But again, pretty important for this product to note it's not actually a herbicide. So it is kind of beneficial for resistance management. We're not spraying large weeds with a herbicide and maybe not controlling them. So it's certainly a product that folks have a lot of questions about, and different tank mixtures, we're seeing the benefits. Was a bit variable, but we'll continue looking at that product into the future. So with that, just want to plug this podcast. Some couple of dry bean episodes on here. You've probably heard me plug that one before. And then weed control guide, QR code in the bottom right part of the screen should bring you to a PDF version.